Welcome to the Diaries of a Witch podcast. And today I'm so excited. I'm joined by a guest. I'm joined by the amazing Cristina Rivera, and you are an incredible astrologer. And I'm just so excited to chat about the pretty eventful, wild month or so that we are having in the stars. So I wanted to bring you on to chat about that. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe tell us your big three. I'm sure we'd all love to know.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for us to talk today about March. And as you said, I'm a tarot reader and astrologer in Salem, Massachusetts. My name is Cristina Rivera. I focus on divination as a tool for decision making and supporting clients in planning ahead with astrological insights. And so that's really my focus is astrology and tarot for practical, grounded decision making. And so that's why I'm so, because March is so busy.
Yeah.
And as I'll give you my big three, and Aquarius rising, Cancer sun, and Taurus moon, I'm ready to kind of like dig in and figure out what this time is best used for.
I guess that's a great leading question. Like what for the listeners, like what is like a general theme that you think they could use this month of March for, or what about the transits that are happening this month, if we were to kind of not like sum them up necessarily, but if we were
Mm-mm.
to create like a theme that they can use to like anchor into around the transits of March, what do you think that would be?
So I want to name some of the transits of the key ones, like
Hmm.
the big ones. So like some of the stuff happening in March is both the Mercury and Venus retrograde, both of
Hmm.
them,
Yeah.
kind of at the same time. Then we have an Aries eclipse, or actually two eclipses, right? Yeah, we have the
Yeah.
eclipses. The eclipses are happening because the Aries one and the Virgo one,
Hmm.
and then we also have Neptune moving into Aries.
Yeah.
So that if, and those are just the like high levels, right? The high levels. There are even pieces within all of that. And so naming all of that, um, I have started to think of March 2025, 2025 in a sense, it broadly, but March in particular, since there's so much energy happening here, as a Janus moment. So like Janus, the
Mm.
god of beginnings and endings, the god of doorways. That's really the image that I've had in my mind when I think about March 2025. How would you describe the figure of Janus?
Yeah, Janus is a deity that like the Romans would have celebrated on the threshold of the beginning of the new year, and that's why we have January, right? The not that January is necessarily associated with this, but the figure of Janus is representative of like walking through thresholds and crossing into new uncharted territory, especially as
Mhm.
far as like time goes. Like he really signifies the changing of like an era.
Absolutely. And yeah, and his in visually, he represents that by being that figure with the two faces, right? One
Hmm.
face looking to the past and the other face looking to the future. So it's a two-faced figure. And that really describes this period of time symbolically because we're at a nexus of time with the outer planets, which govern like world astrology cycles, which I'm not going to
Hmm.
talk too in depth about because there are a lot of like world astrology and political astrology podcasts that cover that much better. But
Hmm.
it's just good to know for in terms of like then connecting to a slice of this time period, which the Mercury retrograde represents what the broader context is, that certain timelines are closing down. That's the looking to the past piece. And then certain timelines are revealing themselves, the looking to the future piece. And that has to do with the outer planet cycle. So there's a lot of long-term impact coming from these outer planet movements. And most of that energy currently in March is concentrated in Aries. And particularly for right now, I'm focused on Neptune's shift into Aries,
Mhm.
because Neptune's shift into Aries is going to be Neptune's preview period. So sometimes when the planets, the outer planets, move signs, right, and they all move signs in different increments, but longer increments of time, they often will have like a couple month preview period where they kind of dip in and then dip out. And Neptune's doing that from March 30th to October 22nd. And this sort of dip in, dip out gives us a heads up about whatever is going to be more prevalent or critical when that planet shifts into a new area. And so for Neptune, once Neptune shifts into Aries, that's the next 14 years. So these outer planet movements make like this big splash. And we want to key into these months of a preview so that we can be offered a choice about how we want to engage with the celestial weather. Now,
Mm.
the choice isn't whether we want to engage with this. This is happening whether we want to engage with it or not. But especially with the outer planets, I feel like we can start to make decisions, set ourselves up so that we're a little more, not totally, because the outer planets are not in our control, a little more set up for how we're going to experience this and other related transits.
Yeah, and I think it's really important as we approach these transits to think about, like you said, both the wider stuff that it's doing or that these transits are encouraging, the kind of like as above, so below idea that comes from hermeticism around like that's sort of why we are looking to the stars for
Mhm.
guidance because whatever they're doing symbolically, metaphorically, or maybe even like literally could be reflected down on earth. I don't know,
Yeah,
depending on the situation. um
yeah, yeah.
and so as witches, as magical practitioners, it's not so much to be like, "Oh my gosh, what is happening? What is going on? This is scary or this is intense." It's
Mm,
more to reflect so that we can see in our own lives how we want to use this new
mm,
energy that we are finding ourselves in, what changes we feel in ourselves because of what's going on with the planets,
mhm.
and just having that awareness so that we can, I think, like, navigate it in our spiritual path, as well as just in the mundane world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will also add that I think that not that I believe in a total. I believe I'm just going to talk about what I believe. I believe
Yeah.
in an essentially friendly universe. Friendly, not like wonderful higher like only high vibes universe, but a friendly universe. And I think that often what I see is especially with the planets and with astrology, um, the the planets giving us an assist, right? And so for prepping for these big movements, and there are a couple different ways they give us an assist, but I'm going to talk about specifically how the first half of 2025 is assisting us, and that is with these inner planet retrogrades. So the inner planets that retrograde, not all the inner planets retrograde, but the ones that do are Mercury, Venus, and Mars, right?
Mhm.
And all three of those planets have been retrograding or will retrograde during this first half of 2025. So the first half being January to June. And these retrogrades are also previewing these long-term implications with the outer planet shifts, but more so in our personal lives. It's a little bit more personalized. You know,
Mhm.
my view of especially the invisible outer planets, and those are just to name them in case folks don't know, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. My view of them, because like when you go outside in the night sky, right, you are going to be able to see the sun, the moon, huh,
Mhm.
Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. I have seen all these planets, right, myself. I have never seen, and I would not be able to see Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto without the aid of a telescope, right? That's not possible. I think maybe sometimes you can see Uranus. I've heard of that, but I've certainly never seen Uranus without the aid of a telescope. And because of that, my belief is that they can't really see us. We can't see them, and they can't really see us. That doesn't mean that they have no effect on us, which I think's not going to get into that. But that doesn't mean they don't have any effect on us. But there's a way in which it's super impersonal. It's more like a force coming for you versus I feel like the energies of the visible planets are a little bit more workable, and they kind of work more in and integrate more, not seamlessly, because I'm not going to pretend like, oh, everything's always love and light, but more consistently workable in our personal lives. And that's what I
Mhm.
think that these series of retrogrades are really prepping us for, is they're prepping us for these outer planet shifts in preview periods.
So let's talk about, I guess, our first event slash events. I would say like we just got out of Mars retrograde as at the time of filming
Mm-hmm.
this, and we are just about to enter Venus retrograde on
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, the 1st of March. So
Mm-hmm.
let's talk a little bit about those two cycles, and yeah, what's going on with them.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, as you said, like as you pointed out, the Mercury retrograde is actually the last inner planet retrograde happening, right? It's the tail end. So Mercury is going to, just so completeness of information for folks,
Mhm.
Mercury is going to retrograde 2 additional times this year, but that's like just part of Mercury's normal deal. Mercury normally retrogrades 3 to 4 times a year, and it's not part of this. It well, it's not essentially part of this concentration of energy happening in March. And so, first, as you said, we had this Mars retrograde in Cancer Leo just wrapped up. And the Mars retrograde, Mars in general, is our inner drive, our motivation. Since December, our inner drive has experienced a revision. Our wants have shifted. And that shift in wants and desires means we've altered our prior inner orientation or direction, right?
Mhm.
We're because Mars carves a path. Now we're kind of heading in a little bit of a different direction. That's what the Mars retrograde generally signifies. And
Mhm.
then coming in hot. We have, not a week after Mars has station direct, Venus is going to start retrograding, as you said, on March 1st. And the Venus retrograde cycle is about harmony, because Venus is the planet of love, beauty, attraction, and bonds. And her retrograde cycle is about harmonizing our inner and outer worlds. Like
Mhm.
kind of that inner and outer experience. So because our inner direction has shifted, now we need to go and understand if who or what surrounds us aligns with our evolving inner self.
Mhm.
Our inner self has changed, and so now we need to kind of say, okay, who or what is around us, and that can involve objects, because Venus can involve values like spending habits, obviously relationships of all kinds,
Mhm.
obviously relationships, Venus governs that, but even just like our appearance and just things about how what we attract to ourselves,
Mhm.
those are outer emanations of our inner experience and how we value ourselves. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I find too, like, to add some stuff to the Venus energy, things like sisters, aunts, mothers,
Mhm.
even like Venusian figures in our lives,
Mhm.
um, our friends, like, those types of relationships, and other people's experiences of, I love how you put it, like the inner world versus the outer world and the harmonization between the two. I think values and your changing values versus other people's values, all of this
Mhm.
stuff can be brought up, maybe inflamed during Venus retrograde. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so also I would also say, like, as you're working on figuring out what's going on with you in your life, keep an eye on the people
Mhm.
around you.
Yeah.
I always notice that during Venus retrograde in particular, like, people around me, I'm really, like, tuned in, like, relationally to what's going on with, like, their
Mhm.
lives and their value shifts and that sort of thing.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, we're all experiencing these transits just differently, right? Because we all
Mhm.
have different birth charts. They're just gonna hit with more or less intensity, or in this area of life and not in that area of life, or in these like interrelated areas of lives, and it all has to do with how your personal birth chart is set up, what more specifically it's going to be. We're just talking about the general themes here. And so, with that, realignment process, which is that core of the Venus retrograde, now this is where we get into Mercury joining the review, revise, restart party on March
Right.
15th.
Yes, and this is also happening, like, he joins the party, the retrograde
Yeah.
party, um, just the day after, essentially, the, eclipse
Mhm.
in Virgo happens, the lunar eclipse in Virgo.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
it's a big entrance that now we're bringing in not just, the, Aries house in your birth chart, or the just Aries in general, not
Mhm.
we're not just involving that. Now we have Virgo being illuminated, a little bit of Pisces that's gonna come in later, a little bit of that, residual Cancer energy from Mars being in Cancer.
Mhm, mhm. Yes, yeah, there's a lot of pieces being tied together. So it can get a little overwhelming in that, and because there's a lot of pieces moving and shifting. Um, but it's important to kind of ground yourself in what Mercury retrogrades generally signify, right? To
Yeah.
kind of like bring it down. Because yeah, it's gonna come in with a bit of a big splash, because literally um, the Virgo eclipse is happening, and that's a whole cycle, different cycle, a whole different. The eclipse story is a whole different cycle, and and Mercury rules Virgo, right? So the fact
Mhm.
that is stationing retrograde and this eclipse is happening in one of its signs, like, that definitely has significance. Absolutely has significance. And generally speaking, when we have these Mercury retrogrades, we're entering a replanning period. And that only makes sense if we think about, like, okay, our direction is shifted, we're focusing on our relationships and on our evolving inner self. And so now we need a replan.
Mhm.
That's what the Mercury retrograde is, because Mercury's the planet of the mind, right? It's the planet that's about making connections, and that can be social connections. So it's kind of your friends, but like, I think Mercury is often just like it's like all your contacts, people that maybe like you would even encompass like acquaintances and neighbors. It's a wider net than Venus, right? Where Venus is more close relationships. It's about, so that's Mercury. Mercury is about connecting ideas and information, and even connecting how to get from point A to point B, right?
Mhm.
This god of travel. And so, as that second quickest planet, Mercury is normally super fast. And what that means then is that Mercury never has any desire to stop. That like that energy, that synergy of connections. I think of them as like, I always think of them as like, like when you're scrolling and you're getting those dopamine hits from like quick little dopamine hits. Like Mercury doesn't want to stop that, and that's therefore what the Mercury retrogrades in general are actually about. They're about enforcing a period of pause and reassessment,
Mhm.
and nobody likes it, but we all need it.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and so even though there's a lot going on this month, I think primarily all of the planets are kind of asking us to do is pause and feel and think and attune maybe a little bit more to the inner self. I think when I think about retrogrades, I always think of like the analogy of like the descent into the underworld. Maybe
Mhm.
Mercury retrograde could be like his sonic psychopomp aspect
Mhm.
going into the underworld to deliver, the souls there or to attend to that part of his archetype. Venus retrograde could be Persephone making her catabasis into the
Mhm.
underworld, which is kind of interesting that it's happening around the equinox when
Yeah.
she should really be coming out. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and so all of the, maybe Mars, I mean, that just happened, but that's like all the heroes, like all of the many
Yeah.
heroes that have had to make their descent into the underworld. So all of this is happening all at the same time for the most
Mhm.
part, and I don't know, I think I would really just urge everybody to, like, what's going on inward is
Yeah.
really important at this
Yeah.
time, and it's not
Yeah.
just a fleeting thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on. Like when I think of, in particular, the Venus retrograde, but you're right. Like I just saw a telling of the Odyssey this weekend, and Odysseus goes down into the underworld, and like, that's like one of the key turning points to him actually being able to go home. So that's that Mars figure. Um, so that yeah, those martial figures going into the underworld, the Venusian figures, and I tend to think of I do think of Persephone, absolutely, but I'll always think about the epic poem, The Descent of Inanna. How familiar are you with
Mhm.
that?
Yeah, I am not as familiar with Inanna and, like, that figure as much as I am with Greek gods, but, yeah, I
Hmm.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah, so briefly to think about this moment of emergence, right? For Inanna versus Persephone, but I think that there are some parallels, and you can probably speak
Mhm.
more towards what the parallels are. But when Inanna, in it's a long poem, and the descent piece is just one episode. Um, because it's an epic poem, so it's long. Uh, and so Anana, when she descends and then comes back up, um, like she emerges from the underworld reborn, right? She comes back from, literally the line is a place where no one returns. So she emerges, and she knows that she needs to, and she starts actually like going around looking at her relationships, basically to see if they
Mm.
passed the sniff test, the bullshit test, right? Because what she does is she comes up and she knows she has to pick somebody to replace her in the underworld. And so the sort of the I don't know how to describe them. Maybe I could call them the ghosts, the ghouls of the underworld are following her around, and they're like, is it this person, is it this person, who do you want to replace you? And first, it's her handmaiden, who's like been her like only helper this entire time. She's like, absolutely not, this is my girl, absolutely
Mhm.
not. I can't. And so then they progress to a couple of Anana's temples where she encounters her sons. And they're like, this son, and they're like, no, he's my boy, like no way. And
Yeah.
she goes on, and she kind of encounters different folks, and then she encounters her husband, her mortal husband. who had just the episode prior, right? So just the section prior, like the entire section is about him wooing the goddess, who's like at first not that all that into him. Like she's not that into him. She's like, I don't know about this dude. He seems sus. But he's like, no, I'm all about you. You don't understand. Like, like truly, there are like pages about how much he loves her vulva. And like,
I love
just
that.
on the, just like, I know, like, you gotta love the ancients and like how like into her he was. And then she dies, and he doesn't actually even mourn her. He doesn't
Mm.
even mourn her, just seats himself up on her throne. She had to throw that whole man away. Just the whole man right away. Goodbye.
Mhm.
Good, like, no thank you.
It's
And,
terrible.
I know, he didn't like nothing. Like he didn't even mourn her, but puts himself on her throne because she's like the queen of heaven and earth. And I'm just like, get rid of him.
The audacity.
I know, right? And so, like, thinking about the Persephone, sort of tie into that descent into the underworld, I think when we come out of that underworld, we come out with some sort of like critical knowledge of things that need to change or shift. And that's where then the Mercury piece comes in, because Mercury, as like you said, that psychopomp that can pass more naturally. Like it was a special trip for Inanna, and it was a special trip for Persephone at the time for her to go down. But Mercury makes that trip all the time,
Mhm.
right? And so like when he, emerges and comes up, it's like, again, that review, replanning process that we can then start to integrate.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, so how does this all factor in with the upcoming Neptune and Aries transit? I mean, I think, on the surface level, Mercury and Venus are both transiting right over
Mm-hmm.
that entrance into Aries, right? And it's interesting, it's like the
Mm-hmm.
Pisces, the last decan of Pisces, the first decan of Aries,
Mm-hmm.
that's where Mercury and Venus are doing their retrograde dance,
Yep.
and that is where Saturn, he's in the second, or sorry, the third decan of Pisces. Neptune is about to ingress into
Mm-hmm.
Aries and cross that threshold. So I think when I think about the involvement of the outer planets and even Saturn, I think, that's a obvious first place.
Mm-hmm.
That's an obvious first place we look, is like literally where that transit is happening.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's another threshold of something birthing, right? Because Pisces
Yeah.
is the womb, and Aries as the start is the actual birthing process. And so, with that in mind, I've been calling this retrograde a tango with the truth. Now, this particular retrograde, a tango with the truth. And
Mhm.
the reason that this phrase came up to me when I was looking at the just all these different chart factors, all these different interplays of the planets, is because of Neptune and Saturn, right? Mercury is actually going to make three conjunctions. That's when two planets join together with Neptune, and Mercury Neptune signals confusion, misinterpretation at the absolute best, like just a misunderstanding, or outright lies. Like someone trying to deceive you, right? Because Neptune possesses a love of fantasy and the ideal. And so Mercury Neptune therefore indicates difficulty discerning between fact and fantasy. So that's Mercury Neptune. Meanwhile, Saturn is close by Neptune. It's also like in that third deck in the last part of Pisces, because they're going to be experiencing their own conjunction next year in February
Mhm.
2026. Yet Mercury, like literally just like it's within a degree, just misses their own conjunction with Saturn during this retrograde. And so Mercury Saturn is the opposite of Mercury Neptune. Mercury Saturn is about an exacting, thorough review of the record, getting those receipts. They're about together patience, focus, serious planning efforts. And so the fact that Mercury is kind of missing that Saturnian reality check during the retrograde, but engages with Neptune multiple times, I'm thinking like literally like a dance, a tango with the truth, where we're just like, because I actually watched Chicago last night, and there's a tango. You remember that he had it coming?
Yeah.
Like, do you remember that
Yeah.
like for those out there, look it up on YouTube. Like look up this dance routine. Like a tango is like super kind of violent, like the especially I think the well both partners can be kind of thrown around a bit in a tango and thrown around, twisted around, and like that's a little bit like Mercury Neptune. Like the truth is a little thrown around with Mercury Neptune.
Oh my goodness. Can't wait. So excited. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
so Mercury is planning. He's we're you know, he's inspiring us to figure things out, to plan things, to reconsider all this information that we're gathering
Hmm.
from Venus and Mars and everything. Yet there's this issue almost within that where like and the way that I think of all of it together is we've found out these truths about ourselves. We
Hmm.
connecting to our inner world, but the execution of communicating them with the outer world, literally, like even with the outer planets, like bringing them into the world, communicating about them. That's the thing that we're having trouble doing,
Yes.
and we're like
Yes.
lying to ourselves around that.
I don't know if we're lying to ourselves. I think the way I've been thinking about it, because I was thinking about that first decan of Aries. So we talked about the last decan of Pisces a little bit. Now thinking about the first 10 degrees of Aries.
Mhm.
I think it's maybe not so much a lie, or it's a type of lie. The type of lie where there's pressure to pick a direction. And I think about that because the first decan of Aries is represented by the tarot card, the Two of Wands, right? Which is this guy, for those who are unfamiliar, standing there. He's surveying an area, he's holding like the world, and it's like this card of picking a direction. Well, what do you tend to think
Mhm.
about when you look at the Two of Wands?
Yeah, I love the Two of Wands. Well, it is. I mean, we're talking about the first decan of Aries, so it is an
Hmm.
Aries card. It is a Mars card, and so when I think about it, I think about especially in relationships, like the
Hmm.
two people who are both independent and who, if they're going to be able to come together, they need to honor their independence. So just the idea of honoring
Hmm.
independence. The other thing that I think of as well is, thinking about relationships in maybe a more, like in a more out of the box kind of way. So, considering the relationships that you have with the divine or, your spirituality or like things that maybe aren't like, one to one or like give
Hmm.
or take relationships, like relationships that have a different context in your life, they give you different things, and maybe honoring and putting some effort into those more complex relationships than just our kind of normal idea of what we think of relationships as.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of pioneering energy in Aries, and so, you know, and I think that that's the thing is like I think that this Mercury in Aries that is about to retrograde, like they like see a spark, they see potential, and there's this like pressure, this lie. I've got to pick a direction now. However,
Mhm.
because just the general significations of that Virgo eclipse that's going to happen, and also just the Mercury retrograde itself. It strongly indicates not being ready to move forward, not being ready to pick a direction. And sometimes when we want to pick a direction, but the time is not right, we're like, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah. Yeah, you
Fuck
can swear.
it, I'm just gonna go this way. Right?
Mhm.
We're just like throw caution to the wind, and that's such an Aries thing to do.
I
Throw
know.
caution into the wind, making a bold move, and it's just like, I'm gonna go do this thing, right? And like, to me, that's that Janus tension, that God of doorways tension, but on a smaller scale, right? Where this is where this
Mhm.
crux of this on the smaller scale on our in our personal lives, where we want to move forward, and the danger is the lie that we might be telling ourselves, or sometimes if it appears relationally, it might be somebody else telling us, you got to pick a direction, you got to do this, you got to do it this way or that way, right? And us just going off half cocked and not making the best decision in the moment, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
um that's what I think is the sort of like critical beginning danger moment of the retrograde.
And then so there's the first eclipse on the 14th of March in
Mhm.
Virgo, and then we have the second eclipse in the cycle, which is an Aries eclipse, which is happening, I believe, on March 29th. And so
Mhm.
there's I think, like, in the middle of this Aries moment that we're having where we're like, "You know what? I'm just gonna do it," or maybe there's that urge that you have to just throw
Mhm.
caution to the wind. The eclipse is present there to it's a solar eclipse, it's a new moon, so there could very much be this sense of us either actually doing something, like taking some type of action, or this seeding for the future of, okay, I'm going to keep in mind the way that I felt at this time. And
Mhm.
it's this seed that starts to blossom into something else as we progress through 2025 of like, okay, maybe I didn't
Yeah.
take action directly, but the seed I planted in the underworld, it's a new moon, right? So the seed I planted in
Yeah.
the underworld
Yeah.
of all of this, all of I've been finding out about myself is we're gonna work on that throughout the year, and that's gonna be the, part I would say one of the defining things that you probably do this
Mhm.
year. Yeah, what
Yeah,
do you think
absolutely.
about that?
So, what I think about that is I want to talk a little bit. I know this is where I'm going to get a little bit technical to give people ways to think about that. Because I do think that that Aries moment is, I'm going to call it a dangerous moment of opportunity, because it's a moment where, like, because the Mars is still in Cancer, right? At that moment, ruling the eclipse. When I looked at that eclipse, I was like, "Ooh, you're either gonna go real wrong or real right." You know what I mean? So, like, again, this is where we have to go through these retrogrades and not pre-decide. So I'm going to give people a couple things to think about, to not try to pre-decide. Like, I think it'd be a huge mistake at the outset to jump 2 feet in, make a premature decision, and not wait for these transits to happen and actually be present and experience them. So I'm going to give you a couple ways of like thinking about experiencing them. So what's critical to know about this retrograde is, and this is where we're going to get a little technical, is talking about this idea called reformation, right? And so reformation is a term for when a planet was going to make an aspect, meaning connect with another planet, but then the planet stations retrograde and doesn't make that aspect. The planet says, nope, never mind, not doing it, right? And so for the listeners, this nope, never minds indicates some specific situation in our lives involving the Aries part of the chart and the Gemini part of the chart. So something's going on between those two parts of the chart. And so, because Mercury was going to make a sextile to Jupiter in Gemini before the retrograde.
Mhm.
So, and sextiles to me are moments of opportunity. Like the in general, they might be like doing the last needed task before finishing up a project, because this is a sextile that's like ending a project, not opening one. So it's like the last thing you kind of need to do. And Mercury and Aries, who wants to pick a direction, right? He wants to pick a direction. Um, Says, no, never mind to Jupiter and Gemini. I'm not doing that. Like, something comes up, right? And
Mhm.
can I use you in your chart as a
Yeah,
general example? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm a Capricorn rising, and we're doing whole signs charts for
Yes.
the listeners.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is a whole sign. So you'll have to, if you're use a different house system, you'll have to transpose that. But
Mhm.
so, like, what this means for like a Capricorn rising, like yourself, is like Gemini is your sixth house of daily routine and work. But like the drudge work, the less glamorous behind the scenes tasks of work, right?
Mhm.
And so to me, that says you likely started thinking about, let's be honest, because it was Gemini and Gemini means more than one, a cleanup project in June of 2024, right?
Mhm.
Sixth house says cleanup to me.
Yeah.
So there was some sort of cleanup project either thought about or initiated June 2024, and now you're in the final countdown, you think, of that cleanup project. But no, you're not. You're putting review. you know? you're putting in the review replan process, because things changed in
Mhm.
between the that June of 2024 and now things changed, and that has the whole retrograde season that we just talked about. And but my question was like, well, why are we in for a review, specifically in line with the Mercury Jupiter cycle? And so Mercury, Jupiter are about coming together of vision and foresight, which is Jupiter, with knowledge, Mercury. So they're about like plotting and planning the future. And the culmination point of this plot, this like June 2024 plot, took place during the last Mercury retrograde, which was in November, December 2024. So
Mhm.
that indicates that there's some unresolved business from the prior Mercury retrograde, which happened in Sagittarius. So again, like, we're talking about lots of parts of the chart, but just focus on the timeline for the listeners of like November, December, unresolved business. And the unresolved business is because, for reasons which we'll talk about in a minute, there was some kind of misunderstanding or mistake that led to building a foundation on like shifting sands. You started build like coming to the culmination point of that planning the future, and like there was just something that you didn't quite get, because Mercury and Jupiter, while were both in their debility. But I'm going to pause
Yeah.
before I get into explaining that.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. And, yeah, and when I think about Mercury, Jupiter, I think about, like, shifting in beliefs or new beliefs or just,
Hmm.
like, the creation of beliefs, the holding of beliefs.
Yeah.
So there might have even another layer to how you could be experiencing this is it might even been like a belief that you were like, "Yep, like I'm gonna do this," or "This
Yeah.
is exactly the philosophy that I'm gonna have."
Yeah.
And then now there's this there could be like this abandoning of that philosophy
Hmm.
or something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this wraps up into the Jupiter in Gemini transit. so like, because Jupiter spends about a year in each sign, and Jupiter is that planet of wealth and abundance, right? Opportunity, expansion, right? I always think of Jupiter as like where is the expansion plan now? And so then when Mercury goes to join up with Jupiter, like you said, like it's about like, all right, what do I believe are my opportunities, are my expansion opportunities right now? And how do I access and plan forward those, right? Mercury's like, how do I help you, buddy? And sometimes Mercury helps him, buddy, and sometimes Mercury doesn't, because Mercury would be like that. Uh, you know?
Yeah.
um, and so, so to talk just very little bit about Jupiter and Gemini, to me, because Jupiter in Gemini is in debility, it doesn't make it a bad Jupiter, but it makes it a confusing Jupiter, where like we kind of need to do, again, Gemini, all the beautiful signs are more than one thing, often at the same time. Like we kind of need to go off in multiple directions, but like you can't stay going in multiple directions. You ultimately, again, to come back to the Mercury retrograde piece, have to pick a direction, right? Do we see how all these
Yeah.
different transits kind of layer back to a similar, if not same theme? We need to pick a direction, and but that's a difficult process, right?
Mhm.
And again, to come back to that November, December 2024 timeframe, part of why that was a difficult process with Mercury and Jupiter, right? Why there was that misunderstanding was them being in their own debility, right? Each in each other's sign, but then each in their own debility. Mercury in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Gemini, and that state is called mutual reception. But my teacher, Sam Reynolds, he calls when there's mutual reception in debility called mutual deception.
I love it. Obsessed
Mutual
with this term, mutual deception. I have this in my natal
yeah.
chart between 2 planets, and so I just, like, I love this term, and I know
Yeah.
what it feels like.
Yeah, when they start lying to each other or like hyping each other up in the total wrong direction, you know? Yeah,
Mhm.
because he describes it as basically two drunks trying to get each other home. And so it's like, yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, and, like,
Yeah.
that is how like, honestly, like, I love the Jupiter and Gemini conversation, because I feel like it's yeah, it's, like, maybe even creating this foundation of, like, experiencing burnout, experiencing, like, there's just too much
Mhm.
going on, too many directions,
Yes.
that really was inflamed in November, like you said, during this mutual deception situation with Mercury. And now there's what do you think? Do you think it's a chance to finally pick that direction? Or do you think it's just like all of it kind of coming crashing down in a way? Like, what do you think this now cycle with the aspect that never was signifies?
Yeah, and I mean the aspect will be,
Mhm.
it will be Mercury. If I Mercury will eventually hook up with Jupiter after the retrograde cycle, though, and
Mhm.
so at that, I think in that time, I think it'll be clear what the last task is, right?
Mhm.
At that point, but to sort of bring us full circle to talk about that third pass of Mercury Neptune, like I think we're going to receive some sort of powerful information on how our dreams are shifting in this new era, on this new outer planet era, and specifically where we're lacking structures we need to evolve towards these visions. Where do we need to put things in place? Because I think that we think we have things in place and we don't.
Mhm.
And what that means specifically will be different for different people, but that's where I come sort of full circle. It's about evolving visions, about lack of structure, and therefore where we need to put those in place.
Mhm. I love that. What do you think are some ways that people can work with this astrology, like in their spiritual practice or from that perspective?
That's a great question. I think that, I always like, if you do nothing else, journal on these key dates, and I can give folks some like, all right, these are the retrograde sort of turning point dates. If you do nothing else, document and journal, because it'll be super revealing. Even if you're like, I don't know what this has to do with anything. Like I remember regarding the Mars retrograde, like and this was like in January, like, because I started watching the Mars retrograde of last year, not this year. Like, I started watching the sort of cycle for the Mars retrograde because I knew it was coming and what a big deal this retrograde season was going to be, all the way in January of 2024. And like, on the day, on the critical like journaling day, all that happened was there was a snow day. I have a child, and school was canceled, but there wasn't actually any snow. It was like this really weird, like false forecast of snow.
Mhm.
And then during the Mars retrograde, the teachers went on strike, and my son was out of school for a month. Like, so and I like, otherwise I was just like, well, that was a nothing burger in January, but it ended
Mhm.
up being a critical part of my Mars retrograde experience when it actually came around. So like even if it doesn't make sense, I think journaling, number one.
Mhm.
Um, Number two, I think that if you're somebody who's proficient with elections, or you want to engage an astrologer who's proficient in elections, um, looking at the chart specifically of the Mercury Kazemi can be really useful for figuring out how you can use, because the Mercury Kazemi, which we didn't talk too much about,
Mhm.
is a really clarifying energy and is a moment of clarity. And so like, look, I think that like engaging with astrologers who can help you figure out how to specifically use that information is important. But then, just in terms of like, again, coming back to that underworld process, like, this is about shadow work.
Mhm.
This all about shadow work.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and that Mercury Cazimi, there's the retrograde Cazimi, which is happening on March 24th, and then there's a direct Cazimi when he's direct and he's conjunct the sun again
Hmm, hmm.
on May 30th in Gemini. So those are maybe those Cazimis that we're talking
Yeah.
about this spring. Um, I think with shadow work, since there is a lot of, like we said, like underworld reflections, internal
Hmm.
reflections. I think even with the Mercury Neptune stuff, with all of it, like it's really helpful to know how you are contributing to the
Hmm.
difficult feelings that you are experiencing. It's not to say that you are the problem. It's not what I'm saying. It's just like you might get yourself to this point where you're like, this person needs to go. I hate this. I need to quit this job. And with all this like energy happening, in the
Mhm.
sky. And then I would really urge everybody to bring it back to you, bring it back to
Mhm.
your known
Mhm.
patterns, what
Yep.
solutions that you can create for these situations that are more about you changing your behavior. It's not about you changing to fit somebody's version of you or you
Mm-mm.
becoming a different version of yourself. It's just about being more honest about how um yeah, what your contributions are
Yeah.
and how you would like to shift that moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think focusing on your sovereignty and on your choices is super important. And one last thing, because this is just not going to be what you want to do for this Mercury retrograde, because Mercury in Aries is loud, bold, brash, move in silence. Be very quiet during this time. If you want to quit that job, if you want to quit that relationship, I'm not saying stay in a dangerous situation, but like, just in terms of like, if you want to quit that friendship, whatever, move in silence about it during until after the retrograde period, for your own good. Because remember, we're going to want to pick a direction at the outset and just be like, nah, this is the thing. And maybe it's not. You need to actually experience the transit and experience what information comes up from that underworld to really have a grasp on what the truth is. And so move in silence during March is my big piece of advice.
I love it. That's perfect. So great. Thank you so much, Christina, for coming on. I had such a great time chatting. I think
Yeah.
we had an awesome conversation. Where can people find you? And is there anything that you are doing right now in your work?
So you can find me at the Starry Eyed Sage on Instagram. And I have my also a link then to my website, Cristina Rivera astrologytarot.com. And I do readings, I teach classes, and then I have my free content as well, where I break down some of these pieces. I'm actually teaching a Mercury retrograde workshop on March 12th. It's virtual, so anywhere you are, you can join me, and it's in my link in my Instagram bio. And I actually talk about, if you can believe it, totally different pieces of this Mercury retrograde. So there's even more to talk about regarding Mercury and his cycles. So I'm going to be talking about that on March 12th. There'll be also a recording of that if you can't join me in person. And I'm also working on, and I've been working on this for since Saturn went into Pisces. I'm again with that planetary preview period, which we didn't talk about Saturn in Aries too much, but I'm working on like a little planetary preview workbook that like about how to kind of use that Saturn in Aries preview period to sort of support your next stage of development and planning, because Saturn is the planet of long-term planning. So it's a super important preview period. So that'll probably be more towards late May. But those are the sort of things that I'm working on right now, just really diving into the cycles and helping to clarify decisions and planning ahead with astrological insights.
That's awesome. I love it. And all those links for your class and for your Instagram page are going to be in the show notes. People can find them easily. Thank you so much for coming on. You're the best, Christina.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will all talk very soon. And
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks again for listening or watching. And you can find me on Instagram at Angelica S. Crazy. You can also join my Patreon and get access to a ton of exclusive monthly content. I am doing a workshop on the 15th all about the Venus retrograde, kind of like sinking into the messages that are coming out of the underworld during this retrograde period. So join me for that. And my new Glamour Magic program, Glamour Magic Mastery, is also starting on March 6th, 2025. Also wanted to give a shout out to all of my Diary and Coven tier patrons, because I do this at the end of all of my episodes. So thank you so much, Jamie, Cheryl, Emma, Alexis, Alessandra, Ashley, Luna, Taylor, Jordan, Chelsea, Quinn, Floor, Megan A, Megan M, Melissa, Natalie, Jen, Carrie, Lauren, Kayla, Lindsay, Sarah, Quinn, Peony, Joanna, Megan S, Megan R, Callie, Nina, Irene, Chelb, Haley, Kristen, Desiree, BFG, Emmy, Hannah, Georgia, Adri, Liz, Kay, Esty, Kristen, Shell, Veronica, Isabella, Lanes, Junie, Elena, Jojo, Teddy, Paige, Shania, Steph, Crystal, Kimberly, Finian, and my newest member, Anna. Thank you so much for being patrons and for listening, and we will talk very soon. Goodbye.